Okay, so back in November, Joe Rogan interviewed Sanjay Gupta, and in the interview, he mentioned a study claiming that children aged 12 to 17 were more likely to get myocarditis from the Pfizer vaccine than to end up in the hospital from COVID. To be clear, this study wasn't peer-reviewed at the time, and to my knowledge, it still hasn't been. It was also based on self-reporting from the VAERS system. Sanjay Gupta correctly pointed out that the correct comparison would be to compare the incidence of myocarditis after the vaccine versus myocarditis after getting COVID. Joe Rogan wasn't having any of it, and insisted on comparing instances of myocarditis after the jab to instances of hospitalization after COVID for this age group. Well, fast forward a couple of months and Joe Rogan interviewed Josh Sepps, who explained to him that myocarditis was far more likely after COVID than the vaccine. Joe Rogan then suggested that the data can't be trusted when it comes from the VAERS reporting system. But of course, 2 months ago he was happily citing a non-peer-reviewed study that was based on the VAERS system. And this is the problem with Joe Rogan. He pretends to be open-minded, but in reality, he goes full Ben Shapiro when it comes to certain topics. First I'll play a clip of the more recent interview as played on the David Pakman show. Then I'll play the old clip of his discussion with Sanjay Gupta. If you're wondering why I'm playing the Pakman clip instead of the original, it's because I've made it a point to avoid watching anything from Rogan's channel, or listen to him on Spotify. But I will watch his content, if one of the content creators I follow happens to cover it. And I say this as a former Joe Rogan fanboy who has been watching his UFC commentary for a very, very, very long time.
Joe Rogan was presented with the evidence that the risk of myocarditis from having COVID is significantly higher than the risk of myocarditis from the vaccine. In both cases, most everybody recovers no problem, but the risk of myocarditis is higher if you get COVID than if you get the vaccine. In real time, you will see really disappointing, goalpost moving, and techniques from Joe Rogan that are really typical, sadly, of the people that email me and are clearly set in their ways and don't want to have their minds changed. So let's take a look at the conversation. This is interesting. It's also really sad.
Pudding. Myocarditis more common after COVID-19 infection than vaccination. But is this with...
So first, now here's a study. The study already says myocarditis is more common from COVID than from the vaccine. So that already goes against what Joe Rogan has been told, and I'll show you part of where he got it.
Children? Yeah, we're talking about young people.
So Rogan now says, well, I'm talking about it within young people only.
Boys aged under 30 after this is what it says here.
So as you can see, the study, as Jamie points out, includes up to age 30. And that includes younger, and that includes all the way up to 30.
With children is the issue.
Well, no.
And Rogan says, I'm only concerned about children here.
We're talking about 15-year-olds.
Well, we're talking about young children.
Male, so yes, 12 to 17.
12 to 17, more likely to develop myocarditis within 3 months of catching COVID at a rate of 450 cases per million infection. This compares to 67 cases of myocarditis per million.
So Josh Zepp points out correctly, look at the 12 to 17 age group. Is that young enough, Joe? Even among 12 to 17, your risk of getting myocarditis from COVID is about 8 times higher than from the vaccine.
Time following their second dose of Pfizer.
Yeah, so you're about 8 times likelier to get myocarditis from getting COVID than from getting the vaccine.
That's interesting.
Now,
that is not what I've read before, but also it's like, even when we're reading these things, it's like, what are we getting this from?
Well, this is a peer-reviewed study, and there's numerous peer-reviewed studies that have been done on this. So notice the goalpost shifting. It's, okay, now there is a claim that the risk is actually higher of myocarditis from COVID than from vaccines, but can we really trust what we're reading? Well, yeah, actually we can.
From the VAERS report, but even from the VAERS reports, when they report this stuff, it's like the amount of people that report, it's the underreporting.
So now there's a new thing, which is Rogan says, even if you consider VAERS, which is not even verified, Rogan says stuff is being underreported. So this study is based on underreporting to VAERS when we know the real issue with VAERS is actually overreporting, completely unconfirmed reporting. Notice the goalpost shifting that takes place.
Depending upon who you ask and like what it is, it's either 1% under.
Okay. So this is unfortunately, this is what happens a lot of times when you have these types of conversations with people. Now, I had this conversation not long ago.
Here it is. Boys more at risk from Pfizer jab side effect than COVID, study suggested. U.S. researchers say teenagers more likely to get vaccine-related myocarditis than end up in the hospital with COVID.
So
if you have a child and you read this, don't you think that you would be hesitant to vaccinate a child that would most likely cruise through COVID with no issues, specifically if they're healthy boys?
Well, I think, yes. So I think you do have to compare apples to apples a little bit here. So I think what this is saying, Joe, is, so if you just said, here's the question: what is your likelihood of myocarditis from vaccine versus myocarditis from the disease?
It says here, the children with boys aged 12 to 15 with no underlying medical conditions are 4 to 6 times more likely to be diagnosed with vaccine-related myocarditis than ending up in the hospital with COVID over a 4-month period.
Right. Yep.
That would make me very concerned.
A lot of the kids who got myocarditis after the vaccine did not end up in the hospital. That's part of the thing. They could be treated as an outpatient. They got steroids. They did not need to be hospitalized.
But we don't have any idea how that's going to affect them long term, correct?
That is true. That will. I think when you raise that point, that's always going to be a fair point, because
but until we have with 4 to 6 times,
the absolute risk versus the relative risk it's a real thing. But I think if the question you're saying is, look, I'm worried about myocarditis, period. How likely is my child to get myocarditis from the vaccine versus from COVID?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not just, hey, how likely are they to end up in the hospital, period, from COVID, but just how likely are they to end up with myocarditis? I think, like if you were to ask the question, how likely are you to end up in the hospital after a vaccine versus how likely you end up in the hospital after COVID, that would be a fair comparison.
What do you think is wrong with this comparison that they're making? Let's put it up again so you can specifically read it.
What is the
risk-reward proposition there is very clear.
No, but I'm just saying that if I say, hey, look, I'm worried about myocarditis. Okay, let's say that's the thing. Let's just take that as an example.
Okay.
What is the likelihood I'm going to have myocarditis from the vaccine versus myocarditis from the disease?
It seems like the likelihood, according to that study, for young boys aged 12 to 15 is far more likely to get myocarditis from the vaccine than you are from COVID.
There's not a lot of kids who go to the hospital for COVID. You're right about that. And myocarditis is a risk. But myocarditis is more common in those who get the disease.
Well, according to that study, it's
I know.
not.
I know.
According to that study, it's. But you're saying it.
But
you're ignoring the science that they're presenting.
No.
They're showing that you're more likely to get myocarditis at a large number, 4 to 6 times more likely.
They're not saying myocarditis. They're saying it's
then be hospitalized with COVID.
Hospitalized with COVID. Right.
Okay, put that up again. It's saying you're 4 to 6 times more likely to get myocarditis than to be hospitalized from COVID.
I will take a closer look at this, but
but you have an impulse to defend the vaccination in light of this data.
Can I pull out something here?
Sure.
Because I have